This is the Powered Up Podcast, show 118.
And this one girl, God love her. I mean, teacher's kid. She looks up at me and she's like, "Mr. Z, you're bored." It's like, I looked at her. I'm like, she goes, "We can tell." And I was like, "You're right. This sucks." And I put the cap on my whiteboard, on my, my marker. I'm like, you guys get the like tired out, bored. I've been through this too. It's like teaching 3 years all at once. You know what I mean? In a week. And so finally I'm just like, what do you guys want to learn? And I literally just turned the whiteboard over to that. That's like a web diagram that pops up. It's like one of these templates. I'm like, all right, give me anything. I don't care. Just anything. I can make anything science related, right?
Welcome to a real-world education with insight and advice from teachers in the game, where current and former educators reveal what truly sets apart the great teachers and what it takes to make a positive impact on students. Whether you're in pre-service learning, new to the game, or a seasoned veteran, this is the show for you. You'll leave feeling inspired to take action because we are powering education by empowering you.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Kennerman, host of the Powered Up Podcast, and I'm here along with my co-host, Mr. Matt, the I Am a Robot Rogers. Matt, what's going on, man?
Things are good, buddy. I'm feeling pretty amped after what we just wrapped up. We were mentioning we just got out of a conversation. We haven't really talked about this, our background, and you bring it up early in the episode of STEM, which isn't where we first met, but it's really where we became friends. And that journey through defining STEM and those type features was something that we progressed through together in our field of education. And some of us, progressed into realms where they took on different jobs and challenges, and some of us are still regular ed teachers. But that being said, just an unbelievably comfortable conversation tonight, talking about things definitely in our wheelhouse.
Yeah, absolutely. And a large part of it is STEM, but our guest, Bryan, talks about his background in middle school science extensively as well. And really the conversation is about how do you inspire curiosity, creativity, and just inspire students to want to learn and to have a desire to learn in your classroom, coupled with fantastic relationships and that camaraderie that you can build in your classroom. And so we went on and on and on because nobody wanted to end the conversation, and it was so rich and engaging that I want to keep this intro as short as we possibly can. But I think you hit on the highlights there. We're talking about STEM, we're talking about technology, but it's really about the mindset of teaching and the mindset of learning in your classroom, and how you can use STEM to inspire that, and how you don't have to at all. And you can just focus on that mindset piece. And Bryan was super inspirational, fired me up. I'm just pumped up after this conversation because it all boiled down to kids finding joy in your classroom in what you're teaching, and more importantly, how you're allowing them to explore learning. So regardless of what grade level you teach, regardless of what subject area you teach, this is not a STEM conversation. This is a bring joy, engagement, and rigor into the learning that's happening into your classroom.
And permission to be great and take risks as well. I just want to add that too, because we've had plenty of conversations with incredible teachers that have done wonderful things in the classroom. It often comes down to taking that first step or just diving right in. And Bryan and our conversation is talking about how you can safely and comfortably dive into that classroom that you're really proud of.
Absolutely. So let's check in with Teach Better and jump right into our conversation with Bryan.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. You can find out more at teachbetter.com/podcasts. Now let's get back to the episode.
Hi, Bryan. Welcome to the Powered Up Podcast. How you doing tonight?
Oh, I'm doing great, Ken, Matt. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So kick things off for us. Introduce yourself to our audience. Let us know where you are coming from and give us a snapshot of what your career in education has looked like.
All right. Well, I am a current STEM specialist. I was a seventh grade science teacher for a crazy number of years. This is year 25 for me. And so in this role that I'm in now, I get to work K-12 with all things shiny. So I kind of work a little bit of an instructional technology integration coach, PBL, STEM, any of that stuff. So on any given day, I could be doing 3D printing, robotics, scratch game design. And I pitched so this year I pitched an elective that I've been pitching for 5 years, and finally they were like, "Hey, let's go for it instead of study halls. Try this out." So that's something we'll probably get into tonight. But that's where I'm coming from. I teach in a military community in upstate New York. It's a really rural area, but the military brings just a different flavor. So I've been in this district my entire career, and probably will finish out. So yeah, I'm pretty excited for what this last, the final home stretch maybe of my career holds. So
Awesome. So I really do want to jump into conversation about your community and that piece towards later in the conversation. But so Matt and I both have had a long passion for STEM. So I'm really excited about this conversation as well, because Matt, we really haven't talked a whole lot specifically about STEM on any show that I can really recall. And so Matt and I we're both classroom teachers. I'm now an instructional coach, but when we were fourth and fifth grade classroom teachers, we were part of an organization, part of a group of friends, teacher friends that started an event called STEM Camp EDU, which was it was a face-to-face professional development event to inspire teachers to use STEM. We had a lot of school districts come out that were starting STEM programs that were coming to our event. I actually then became one of those. I was a inaugural teacher of an elementary STEM special, and so STEM is near and dear to our hearts in many different ways. So what was the transitional moment or the inspirational moment that made you say, I no longer want to be just the S of science. I want to be a STEM teacher and move out of that middle school science? And at the same time, how much of it is really the same of what you're doing in science? It just has a different frame.
yeah, I think, I don't know if there was a moment. I always found myself going, "Come on, like the reason you guys don't understand this math is because it you can't hold it." But in my class, like you can see how that car crash. I'm playing with Hot Wheels on my desk, with seventh graders. You can see how those mathematical relationships change, and so I kind of always did things that way, and then kind of throughout my career, I've always been on, I call it the bleeding edge, not the cutting edge. Like I get bored easy. I want to be fresh in front of the kids. I want to do crazy things. I want to learn new stuff. And so I was always innovating. And I remember I first got a hold of my Lego, what did it used to be called? Mindstorms, gosh, back in the day. And so we were teaching the body systems, and I'm like, man, what do you guys think about? Because we're in a military community, right? So it showed the DECA arm, which was like this DARPA project that was going on back with Dean Kamen, who invented the Segway, was trying to invent this arm for soldiers who had lost it in battle. And of course, in our community, you're gonna see amputees all over the place. And so it's kind of normal. And some of my students, it's in their family, and so kind of pitched that idea. And I was like, if, this is a great way we could learn about the human body instead of going through the typical anatomy and physiology unit. And so I was like, all right, well, what would the hand have to do if we were going to build this thing? And we came up with it. It had to play rock, paper, scissors, right? So we called it the Robo Shambo Project, and kind of like from there, the kids were doing it all, right? They're writing about it. They're doing some computer science and math, and it was awesome, And like from that point on, I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure I want to do this full time. And so it was a couple grants. I was out on grant for 3 years doing some of this once before, and got PBL trained we tried to push STEAM teams, and had like one really successful year, and then our staff kind of got like, moving around, and it was just like, man, there's so much. You almost have to get like a multi-year commitment from your staff to say, you got to buy into this, and you almost have to stay put, or else it's really hard to bring a new person in who doesn't have that culture. And so, yeah, so then I ended up going back to the classroom, kind of totally refreshed, and another opportunity came back around, and with the guy that was leaving, they asked me what we should do with the program, and I basically wrote my position, and they're like, "Okay, sounds good. Do you want to interview?" I'm like, yes, I do. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it gets all of that, right? Like, once you find that thing that's you're passionate about, and you want to do everything that way, especially when you're not in high school, you've got a little bit more freedom to kind of flex the guardrails of your curriculum and do cool things, as long as kids are happy and engaged. I think most of those administrators are going to be like, okay, yeah, keep going.
I think Ken and I have had many conversations, really, actually off air, many more than ever on air, as Ken was mentioning. And the STEM, if you want to call it movement, really gave permission to educators like us to do PBL, but I refer to PBL not as project based learning, but purpose based learning. Like in that scenario, you have an actual purpose. I think project based learning lets you see the scope. It's going to be a long term activity, but purpose based learning is what is your problem and how are you leading to a solution? And I love what comes out of that. So much is acquisitional based. What do I need to know right now to be successful to deal with the current problem I'm dealing with? And the kids having to find those solutions, those are both the hard and soft skills that, Bryan, in your position as a science teacher, you were already probably doing. And again, you just had permission to do so. So, in that realm of whether purpose or project or acquisition based learning, whichever way you want to define it, and please share your version of it as well. What do you feel like specifically in your environment, being a military background, beyond obviously, like you mentioned, amputees and those type scenarios? How do you feel like there were similarities and differences between your acceptance of STEM within your school and your curriculum compared to maybe someone who's not in such an environment like yours?
That's hard. Cause sometimes I feel a little bit like I don't want to say an outcast, but an outlier, even where I am. It was always wanting to. I just don't want to do the same thing twice. I mean, even if it's good, I'll take the chance to screw it up by trying to trying to make it better, and that's okay. So I don't know. Like, I guess I wouldn't maybe look at it in that way. Even that, I do think it's such an intensely personal thing. If you're coming at it from the perspective of that it's about their authentic learning, right? And so anytime you can find something in your community, and to be honest, I mean, I show the kids, you guys all know this, you start a project, it starts off as like 3 days, and pretty soon it's like 6 months, and you're starting year 2 of the same project. But so I was like, man, you're trying to get that perfect hook for the kids. And there's one of a 12-year-old kid, most seventh graders are 12, at some point in the year, who had amniotic band syndrome, right? And so he's born, he's all he has is this one bone in his thumb, and he and his father 3D print a hand. And so I weave that in, and then you have it's one of the twins that played for Seattle, same deal. Like I'm Shaquem. I can't remember if it's Shaquem, right? And I'm gonna draw a blank on his last name. You guys can throw that in the show notes later, right? But he, Griffin, awesome. And I think he just left the NFL, but like pretty crazy story. And so you show those little snippets as time goes by and add to it. But in those would fit anybody's. Every kid is going to understand a professional athlete, or what it might be like if they can't pick up a water bottle while they're writing, like to have use of both hands. And so I think some of that was just my own curiosity and wanting to learn. And that's something else. I just feel like we're killing it And I don't say that with the positive modern, urban dictionary killing it. We're killing curiosity. And so it doesn't matter to me what the project is about. If the kids want to learn, I don't even anymore. This is where I'm at. I don't care where it goes. If they're driving, I'm just there to ask questions and try to like plug in a skill that might help them later in life or have a conversation that might challenge the way they think. But I don't care anymore if it lines up with what maybe is written out according to the state, because they're what good is it if we get through all of our curriculum and those kids were just bored out of their minds. And so like it's weird how that's kind of shifted over time. That in the beginning I was like, oh man, I gotta have my perfect driving question and entry event and all that stuff. And now it's like how can I just get them to talk and then to go work while I walk around and see what awesomeness they can make, and some people might look at that and say, well, you're dumbing it down. I'm like, if it's better, okay, So I don't know if I answered your question, but I feel like it's kind of like, I don't know, you get all these frameworks and they're awesome in the beginning, but then you begin to go, okay, it's maybe a little bit more of that craftsman. You kind of get a feel for exactly what's going to hook the kids and then adapt as you go.
Well, I think Ken, feel free to chime in on this as well, because I think that there's a transition point. And like you said, Brian, if I feel like I'm doing the best thing for kids, there's nothing that's going to stop me from doing it. Yes, I understand state expectations and having to take a test at the end of the year, and there's a component of that, but I also believe that my kids are going to reward me. I use that with air quotes, reward me with great test scores, because guess what? They're probably going to work a heck of a lot harder in this environment and gain so much more knowledge in this environment. I guess what I would say is either what is that transition point for Ken, Brian, I can kind of speak to myself afterwards, but of getting to that point, because I think all three of us have put our rigidity to the side slightly. We respect what we need to do by all means, and we're still a professional and we're not ignoring. But whether it's admin approval or early in the career, when did you feel like you could go in that realm and have that perspective, even if an educator's listening to this who's in year 2 and says, that's how I want my classroom to be, but I'm scared I still need to jump through the hoops. I'm not ready to go that path yet.
Yeah, I mean, my thought is, um, I'll suck it out, Buttercup, and just go. But I'll temper that with have a conversation about priority standards, and then space them out. Like I guess this. So I've got a guy. In order for me to go out on grant, we had to find a replacement, right? And it's the same deal. He's like, well, that's all great for you, but somebody comes in, you're not getting scrutinized the way I am as a new guy, and part of it, and this is really, I don't mean it to be cynical, but nobody in New York, at least anyway, cares about science and social studies, because all of our state benchmarks, our tests, our APPR stuff that's tied to those, and that's a whole other show, right? They're ELA and math, and so in a sense, people come in and they're like, they see kids doing something, the teacher is smiling, no one's dead, so they kind of go, awesome, and then they leave, and I wouldn't say that I like took advantage of that. But in a sense, a lot of times I closed the door and was like, we're just going to do something awesome and it's all going to wash, like it was good teaching. I'll stand by that. It was, I could line it up to their curriculum, but it may not have fit a map, that a pacing guide that somebody felt like I was supposed to be on. So this is actually the exact advice that I gave to my colleague who's kind of, filling my old classroom is figure out, let's boil it down, because I'm also the head of the department, so I can actually say this, like, let's figure out the least amount that matters and teach that like a banger, like make it awesome, but then do something that is engaging. And you kind of hit on this a minute ago, Matt. I was going to say the word leverage. Like, I think there's some, it doesn't have to be a negative connotation to the word leverage. When kids know that they are going to have freedom to create, that they're going to have freedom to explore, that they're going to have fun, that you're happy, that you're on their side, then when it comes for that day where you guys go, hey, this is a lab that the state says we have to do, you guys are going to crush it, but there's a lot of reading and it might not be super amazing. And not that I would say those words, but then they're like, okay, because they know they're going to get right back to the norm, which is that they own a majority of that classroom. So I think there's a give and take there.
Absolutely, and and I want to speak to two things that you guys are talking about here. One is that leverage. I really like the use of that word, and it is in a positive way. And it's not just in this context that we're talking about. It's the idea that students know on a daily basis you're making your greatest effort to make class engaging, welcoming. You're establishing a culture that they feel accepted, that they feel there's a community. All of these things play into students wanting to be there. Like that's the leverage you're trying to create, whether it's through community, it's through engagement. All of those are components that we should be working on. But you can leverage that. I was just having a conversation with a high school teacher who we were talking about cell phones. And this year our high school is much stricter on cell phones being out in the classrooms. It was a big problem, and it's much better this year. And teachers were just given more support in strategies they could use. He has the old school like calculator pocket chart, and the kids, they turn them in every day they walk into his classroom. And he said, I refuse to give that up. And I asked him, I said, are you getting any pushback with it? And he said, not really. And I said, that's because you work really hard at making your class engaging. The kids are fine to give it up because you really work hard to create a classroom that they want to be in. And he's very, very strict. Let me take that back. He's not very strict. He's very black and white. You know what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. And I truly believe that's one of the best classroom management strategies you can have. Because even if it's on the stricter side or the more rigid side, when kids know what the line is, that's all they care about. It's the wishy-washy that they struggle with. So I do think you're creating that leverage to motivate them to do the boring stuff. I did that all the time. Exactly what you said, Bryan. This is going to be really boring today, but I have to do this. You have to do this. Let's just knock it out of the park and get back to what we love doing. And that's motivating for kids to hear because you're acknowledging it. And they also know that they are going to go back to the more engaging styles of learning. The other,
and I love that you're kind of using that like I'm on your team, us versus them psychology there too. Like, hey, I know, it I don't want to call it, subversive, but it is along those lines where you're like, yeah, we got this together.
Right. And even you can even,
it's that necessary.
Yeah, and you can even play into the fact that like, listen, I want to show everyone that what we do does create great results in learning. So knock it out of the park so we can prove them that what we are doing is worthwhile and you are working hard and you are learning it, even though it looks different. And the standards, I think, is such an important topic. I can't speak to other states, but I can speak to Pennsylvania. And I can guarantee that I would almost guarantee if you look at the actual, in Pennsylvania, it's called eligible content, which is the eligible content that can be tested in those grade levels and subject areas on those state tests. There's not a lot there. There really is not a lot there when you look at it. And if you use that as a roadmap to work through, even if you have a program that you're supposed to follow, it lets you know, like you said, priority standards. What are the ones that you really have to focus on? And it's all about application. It is not about rote memorization. It is not about, for math specifically, it's not about being able to calculate without a calculator. It's about situations, students figuring out what process am I supposed to use and how am I supposed to solve it. And the learning environment that you're describing is that. Students in your type of classroom don't see a worksheet that says dividing fractions word problems. Guess what? That's not word problems because you took all of the reading and the thinking out of it just with the title of that worksheet. So when they're in a learning environment like yours, they're constantly figuring out what skills do they need to use, or they don't have the skill, and that's where you're stepping in with that style of mini lesson. So, what advice do you have for teachers that they're drinking the juice, but they just don't know where to start or they don't know how to do it? How can you encourage teachers to let go a little bit or to start with curiosity for students to be able to explore content but still navigate specific standards that they want to teach?
Can I add one point, Brian? Because we hear in a question related to this, start small a lot of times, right? Start with a lesson, start with a mini unit, start with a class. And the challenge that I give you is maybe a little bit broader than that. How could you do that beyond just that start small suggestion?
So I've probably told this story way more since since this year started, but in the midst of the scaling back and coming back from COVID, we were cohorted. I know that's like that dirty word. I don't know if you guys had that as well, but like half the kids, we went to block in the middle school. So I'd have a class of 12 kids for 86 minutes, and then I wouldn't see them again for a week. So like I had a Monday class, like three classes on Monday, 3 on Tuesday, 3 on Thursday, 3 on Friday, and Wednesday everybody was virtual. So we'd have 12 sections. And it's just crazy. Well, anyway, on Friday, right? I'm in the third block or fourth block because lunch is in there on Friday. So this is my 12th time teaching an 86-minute lesson, small groups, which was great, but they're spread out, right? So it's bizarre. And this one girl, God love her. I mean, teacher's kid. She looks up at me and she's like, "Mr. Z, you're bored." It's like, I looked at her. I'm like, she goes, "We can tell." And I was like, "You're right. This sucks." And I put the cap on my whiteboard, on my marker. I'm like, "You guys get the like tired out, bored. I've been through this too. It's like teaching 3 years all at once. You know what I mean? In a week." And so finally, I'm just like, "What do you guys want to learn?" And I literally just turned the whiteboard over to that. That's like a web diagram that pops up. It's like one of these templates. I'm like, "All right, give me anything. I don't care. Just anything. I can make anything science related." Right. So, and that's kind of my short story long to your answer there is like, so all these kids throw out something. So I fill out 12 bubbles around the outside and then I kick it back to them. I go, "You got 2 votes. You can vote for anything except your own answer. Come on up here, grab the whiteboard, and walk around and put a tick marker initials next to it." And there were these girls that were super into horses. And so they dominated this class and we were going to learn about horses. So I pulled up another one and I'm like, "All right, let's talk about wild horses, because other than that, I may not be interested in, let's just face it, it's my class." So the kids, I'm like, "What do you want to know?" And one kid's like, "Are there wild horses in the world?" Like, I mean, I knew yes, but I didn't know where. So, oh my gosh, it was, in 25 years, it's probably my favorite lesson ever. And it was completely out of like boredom and frustration that the kids they called me on it, right? And so one, I guess what I'm saying is, don't overcomplicate it. Literally ask the kids, just take a day. I don't care. It's a Friday, like we're ready to go on break. It's a Friday. Ask them. To, I've got nothing planned today. Whatever you want to learn, we'll learn. And I'll bet that if you've been doing this for any length of time, you can turn that subtle shift of okay, so I heard you say horses, but since science we talk about ecology, let's talk about wild horses. Oh, awesome. Like it was still within the realm of what they wanted to learn, but I I was teaching, like we learned about where they were, so like biomes, so like what is it that makes that a suitable habitat. I could have tied in 15 vocabulary words in that standard, but they pulled it all out and it was outstanding. In fact, from that point on, when they came back on Wednesdays that year, every Wednesday was what I called my science day. And that's how I started every day. I said, "I do not have a plan. Whatever you guys want to learn, we'll do. And I don't care where it goes." And so I had a class of like boys, they were like 9 boys, like diesel engines. I'm like, "Cool, let's go." And I can tie that in, and I didn't even care because if I could or not. But if somebody walked in, there was not one kid in that class from that point on that was disengaged. And so it doesn't have to be a 6-week project. It could just be a day. And I will say, I wish I had learned this. Prep the kids for it. Like, maybe throw a Google form out to them the week before, because this I mentioned about this elective that I pitched. There was no plan other than I have all these STEM tools that were purchased by a grant. We could do anything you want, but I don't want to direct instruct from day 1 to day 180, whatever. I actually want to give ownership. And so the first day, I had these mix of 6th and 7th graders. There's 22 of them in the room. I'm like, all right, guys, this is your class. Like, it's so empowering. What do you want to learn? It was like crickets. They just stared at me. And I think they've never been given permission for what should come natural. And I like it. It was not a punch in the gut, but it was like, what? You don't realize the gift this is. And they just couldn't get it. So I'm like, all right, let me lead the witness a little bit. And we studied Artemis, so these new moon missions coming up. And because I was interested, and I was like, all right, well, if you can't figure it out, I'll model it. I don't know much, but I'm super curious about what's going on right now.
I think that's so important because especially in secondary, and this isn't a knock on secondary teachers, but I think that curiosity is really shot by the time they make it to secondary, because of, like you just said, they're not used to it. And it's not a reason not to do it. It's a reason to realize that you need to invest in your students to be able to do it. I'm working with a high school stat teacher who has been using this explore first, formalize later model this year. And when I checked in with him, he said the first month was terrible. All the kids kept saying were, and he's got a lot of juniors and seniors in his class. All they kept saying were, can you please just give us a worksheet? Can you just tell us what to do? Can you just give us the work? And he said it was really awful. It was terrible. And at about 1 month, it completely 180'd. And the kids now love it. They're so engaged. They always talk about how they like his class more than the other classes because he actually makes them work hard and he actually makes them think. So the shift happened, but it takes time. It takes persistence on the teacher's part. It takes modeling, like you said, and teaching the kids to understand what that curiosity can look like, or having that backup plan for when they're not ready for it. Or like you said, giving them that time, maybe giving them, say, hey, next Wednesday, we're going to explore topics of your interest. At some point between now and next Wednesday, drop your idea in this Google form, and then we're going to evaluate the results. So you're not putting them on the spot. It's similar to a strategy I like to use when I would do peer editing, or writing conferences. I would have the students fill out a Google form when they were ready to conference with me. In the past, I would always ask them when they're sitting with me after I critiqued it, do you have any follow-up questions? Fifth grader, no, they never had a follow-up question. But on that Google form, when they requested a meeting with me, they had to write something they wanted me to look at. And in the beginning, their answers were terrible. But when I would meet with them, I would say, hey, Matt, we talked about this. You should have made that your answer on this Google form. Next time, think about that. That could have been a great conversation for us to start with. So I may have stopped editing less, or I started editing less, but there was intention in it. And it just got the kids to be thinkers. It got them to evaluate and think about what they're learning and how to be thinkers. And it's hard to get started, but once you do, it's impossible to go back. And you build momentum. I don't know what you think, but the amount of effort and time it probably took you in your first time trying just these exploratory, curiosity-based, student-led learning experiences, it probably took a while to get your students to where you wanted and you figuring out where that was. And every year after that, I got to that point sooner because my confidence was stronger, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I would say, like, for me now, I hope no one's ever, admin listening to this, but I don't feel like I need to prepare. It's almost like, and now again, of course, I have an elective, and so I don't have a curriculum. But we walked in, so I co-teach this particular elective, and walk in, and today it was like, all right, so we had a kid in his free time using an app. Now we did video game design, right? And I showed the kids, it was around Christmas time with Scratch. I didn't know really much anything about Scratch, so I spent 3 hours learning coding my own video game. I showed it to the kids. It was horrible, and I'm like, okay, make something that sucks, and then we'll fix it together, and just go, right. And so then by the time I got to like the third lesson, I'm I'm talking to the kids and I'm like, oh, yeah, so this is what we're gonna do next. We're gonna make the presents fall from the sky with gravity, or you might have tacos falling from yours. I don't care what it is, but we're gonna make them fall more like a real gravity. And one kid, he's like, it's a sixth grader. He's like, okay, can we go now? Like he wanted me to stop talking so he could work. Like that right there was evidence to me, like, man, this is such a different model. These kids are so motivated, they don't even want to listen to the directions that might help them. They just want to fail, which is part of our get out there. I told this, one of my inspirational talks is, your first thing always sucks, and and that's okay. Like mine is horrible, and the kids are laughing at it, but I'm like, I don't care. I had to get like this horrible Santa Claus getting bonked on the head, with presents game that lasts 9 seconds out there. And actually did a whole like YouTube YouTube series on it afterwards, and the kids were following them, like, hey, I need to make another one because I can't figure out how to do this or whatever. So it's really interesting to me that, yeah, I mean, I think there is a time in your career where you feel that way about your content, but then there is like this identity comfort level piece that comes out where you're like, there are days, I don't know if you guys feel about this, you feel like you could pretty much teach anything. Like give me a little bit of time to get used to the age level and the curriculum just a couple days ahead, and I think I can still use, they're human, they're human learning things. They're not really, I don't know. And so I feel like I could walk into anything and in a couple days be pretty good. I mean, it might be more stressful, and there's somebody that has a degree in statistics that's going to be way better than me, in that sense. But I feel like I could still engage the kids with a real world problem that they wanted to tackle, um, in a way less time now than 20 some years ago.
Well, and I think that's where Ken and I had a hot takes episode recently where I vocalized my frustration with something like summative assessments, the dependence on the after the fact. Oh, great, we're done. We're not going to create time to come back to the concept anyway, because guess what? We need to move on. But it's a big test worth a lot of points, and prove to me you paid attention over the last 2 to 3 months. I love what you're saying, because I am feeling that way now. And I have a student teacher, and I'm really struggling with having the conversation of saying, oh, here's my preparation for today. It's not much. And there are days where I show up and I look at the math questions ahead of time or the reading ahead of time for 2 minutes, and I formulate, what do I want to pre-teach in 5 to 10 minutes that allows me to turn it over to the kids for the other 90% of the class. And here's the minimum you need to complete, and then this is how you extend. That is what my planning and prep is. But part of that is I've been teaching the same grade level for 9 years. So I don't necessarily need to know how to teach every day's lesson. I need to remember, how does today's lesson link to tomorrow's, which will eventually lead to that summative assessment. I guess what I'd love to, I don't want to change the topic a little bit, but I love, you mentioned in the STEM room that you have what gadgets and gizmos, aplenty, the Disney line. We all have a tremendous amount of probably STEM tools at our disposal. And one of the things that I'm struggling with, and Bryan, I would like you to answer this for me, is I have found my return on investment of devoting myself to a tool to greatly decrease over the last few years. And part of that reason is because the tools have gotten so good and a lot of them do the same thing. But when you are evaluating something you're bringing into your classroom, whether it's a laser cutter or 3D printer, an Ozobot, Sphero, Dash and Dot style robot, or just doing digital coding through Scratch, what have you. How much do you feel like you're prioritizing tool over function and outcome? And what structure are you providing kids to narrow down? Because I teach fourth grade, so my kids want to figure out how they can use one of every single thing instead of diving super deep into one.
Yeah, and I think that's I think there's a bunch of I've been playing with this hourglass model in my head over the last 6 months or so, and there's a bunch of things that I feel like we take kids, like I'll give you an example, from diversity to diversity. So if you can imagine this hourglass, we take kids from a diversity of backgrounds and we pull them into essentially a common point in education, and then we send them out into a diversity of fulfillment in the world, right? Like they'll do crazy things. And so it's a really challenging thought process to think. If you apply that same exact thing to technology, then I'll agree with you, Matt. It's like I don't care what the tool is. I mean, I loved Ozobots for like K1, 2, and then it's kind of like, and I've worked with VR, and there are a couple tools that I would say soup to nuts, man. They're amazing. And Tinkercad is one that, like, I could walk into any classroom. It does not matter the age, and I could spark something with kids on Tinkercad. And I mean, I've done math modeling with showing kids how to multiply fractions with just using transparency of overlapping shapes. And I mean, I have enough math background to get my science degree, but like that was easy. And then we've used it in ELA. So there are some tools that I think that they really kind of amorphous, you get this ability to move them around, and they just are pretty amazing. But most of the time, like, I guess what I look for is, are there transferable skills that would allow me to hand a kid a temporary Scratch account or Lego or like the Root robot or, I don't know, even Minecraft, and say, I don't care what you choose. This is what I want you to create, and make it whatever you want. And I think that is the goal, is that when I mentioned that hourglass, is I'm going to take from, I don't care what background you're coming in. We call it an MVP. So I read the Lean Startup, right? If you haven't read that book, it's phenomenal, but apply it to education, which is an MVP is a minimum viable product, right? If you got a startup, but we call it a minimum viable project. And that was like with our Scratch game, you had to have something falling and a character that moved left and right. At that point, I don't really care if it throws something, if it moves up and down, if it jumps, if it's animated. I don't care if you have sound, but that was it. And so, like, once you can establish this is success, then I don't care how you get to success. And that broadening creativity is where ownership lives. It's like when you tell a kid, you have to do this way, all of a sudden you killed it. And I don't know, even for me, and I'm 48. Like, if you tell me it's got to be this way, and in my mind, I'm like, but there are so many other ways. No, you got to be. Yeah, I'm out. Like, I'll comply if I have to, and then I'm probably going to go find a way to do it better on my own. And again, go back to leverage. Why wouldn't we do that? Why wouldn't we give that ownership to kids and say, I don't care? Like Brush Ninja, I'll tell you, that's another one. Brush.ninja, if you haven't used it before. It's simple, stupid animation, but we showed it to kids in 3 minutes, and I was like, okay, go. This is it. Go play for 5 minutes. I'm telling you nothing. I don't care how much you struggle. I don't care how much you fail, but in 5 minutes, every one of you are going to teach me something that you learned. And, we call it play 5, or play and tell, right? Play for 5 minutes, and then the kids teach the class, and then we have them go out again. And then the second day, there's actually the MVP. But that's kind of a framework we're working on, is just that raw inquiry. A lot of those tools, like if you use Lego and then you move over to Sphero and then you come back to Scratch, like it kind of feels, and even a microbit, like you could move between all of those in a day and only have like maybe about 6 seconds where you go, oh, that's over here. You know what I mean? So for me, I feel like, I think that's the ticket, right? That transferability of skills and environment.
Yeah, and I think that's so important with teaching students technology in general. It's hard for classroom teachers to take on that little bit of an extra role, but when you're doing things with students, it's important to encourage some level of technology skills, and that transfer piece is really important. When you think about um, Apple products, very similar symbols across all platforms, even apps that Apple doesn't own. You know, the share arrow. The version of the share arrow is very simple to find. I was recently just helping a student in a middle school STEM class. I was leaving the classroom and he was working by himself, and he was like, "Hey, do you know anything about Corel?" And I've never used Corel personally. We have lasers and we have things, and students use it a lot, but I've just never personally been involved in using it. And I said, "Well, what do you need help with?" He said, "I have to center these 5 circles to create a bullseye." And I said, "Oh, okay. Yeah, let me try and help you." Within 20 seconds, I found the align, right? Because I know Tinkercad. I know to center objects on Tinkercad, you select them all and you align horizontally and vertically. And we just had to work through all the menus. I was like, it's got to say align. It's or something, or I was looking for a synonym of it. And then I showed him, I said, here's the align. And I worked him through it, and we did it together. And it was that transfer skill that I was using that I really think is important to teach students. And you mentioned using Tinkercad. Matt and I are both huge fans of Tinkercad. We both have 3D printers, and it's a program that I agree is so transferable to so many different classrooms. And so if you're a teacher who can explore technology on your own, check it out. See, it's 3D design. You can also do circuitry in there. So if you teach those standards, but I used it to teach almost any 3-dimensional lesson that I taught in 5th grade math, because the students can digitally manipulate an object versus looking at a 3-dimensional object on a flat piece of paper. It's really hard for kids to do. So simple things, I would say, make a rectangular prism with this volume, or it was so simple to do. And even the last unit of my year, they had to create a box to hold 12 marbles, and it either held them. If it held less than 12, they failed. If it held 13, they failed. So they really had to look at interior and exterior volume and those different things. Even if you don't have the printer, you can still do activities where they're exploring the concepts. I did one with another class. The teacher gave every single student or pair of student a mug, and they had to design the mug in Tinkercad to scale. And Tinkercad on the iPad has the AR component. And so I had the iPad connected to the projector, and I would put the AR mug next to the real mug, and the students would look at it and compare. And it was pretty spot on, like with scale, but we would look at like the curvature of the handle and those different things. And it was just a neat activity, but the students had to use a lot of 3-dimensional thinking. They had to understand volume and measurements and all of those different components. And so as a classroom teacher, if you're comfortable, explore that stuff. Check it out. Check out Scratch. There's a great way to pull ELA and into all those coding platforms. If you're not, look at the resources in your district. Do you have instructional coaches? Do you have technology coaches or STEM teachers that can help you out? Do you have to reach out maybe to Pennsylvania? We have IUs that support multiple school districts. I'm sure the resources are out there for you to explore and to find professional development or someone to support you in your classroom. But really look at it from a mind of enhancing what you're doing, not just bringing in fun stuff. It's cool to bring in fun stuff, but when you enhance the learning, it excites everybody, including you, because now you're seeing a totally different way to explore the content. I know I'm going on long here. I have one more piece to add to this. An activity that I really like to paint the picture with this is how you can use STEM to enhance learning. So a very traditional lesson, primary teachers will read the 3 Little Pigs, and then as a follow-up, kids will use toothpicks and gumdrops or toothpicks and marshmallows to build a house, build the strongest house. That's great. Kids are collaborating, they're using teamwork, they're using engineering. It's a cool follow-up to the story. but the reading lesson ended the moment you had the students start building that house. What I would do is I would give the students more materials than that: paper, construction paper, cardboard, and I have the students create the three houses from the story. And when they're ready, I'm going to come around and act as the wolf. They have to build a house that's going to fall down right away. They have to build a house that's going to fall down after some effort. And they have to build a house that won't fall down. And so now they're exploring those same collaboration, communication, and engineering ideas, but they're also thinking about retelling the story. They have to realize that they have to create those three houses. I don't tell them to do that. I tell them they need to reenact the story. And so you're extending the reading lesson, you're extending the standards that you're trying to teach. And that's where, when I moved into teaching STEM, I missed like that creativity of tying in the standards. But I also love that I could just do whatever I want because I didn't have specific standards to follow. So either of you, do you have more advice on regular ed classroom teachers teaching regular subjects, whether it's world language, health, math, reading, things they can do to spark excitement and curiosity with, just say, STEM concepts?
I'll jump in real quick. I love remembering what middle school and elementary school was like for me and trying to put a spin of modern day teaching with it. Like Bryan, you were saying, Ozobots definitely have a range within the codable aspect of it making sense. And so when Ken and I mentioned STEM camp before, but when we started, I bought 5 Ozobots from a classroom grant, 2 Spheros, 3D printer, some cardboard VR that I didn't understand, didn't come with the technology, right? The whole litany of let's just have a buffet of options. And for a long time, I taught my kids how to use it. And I've gone through waves and conversations of what I prefer. And I'll say that, like, I remember creating projects in 5th grade, when I was in 5th grade, where I would create a diorama or an attribute of a poster that kind of showed the plot lines of a story. And one of the things that I absolutely love is there's no coding related to the Ozobot whatsoever necessarily, but that Ozobot can dress up as a character and go through that plot line. And now you have the story being told, and the kids are either narrating as the Ozobot is moving around as the 3 little pigs, or, a curricular item. One of the things that I do for student-led conferences, which has been really enjoyable, and I let the kids, we do student-led conferences in the spring. So like fall is when we meet with parents, and I still do that, but there will be STEM-based tools around my classroom, and it does a complete year's review of everything we've taught. So every single kid, it's almost like the classic, everyone write up a newspaper article about a specific topic, but instead there are just noises and robots moving all over my classroom. And so we kind of put our math concepts in one area, and we put our ELA concepts in one area, and where they merge. But it's fascinating to see one Ozobot go through the steps of long division, another one talk about the major battles of the American Revolution, and the last one go through the cycle of the water cycle. And all those can happen, and the kids can bounce around and share, hey, curricularly, this is how we've covered this curriculum throughout the school year. Guess what? I completely get all these concepts, and my enhancement, it took me a long time to realize, hey, I'm trying to make a tool work for me, as opposed to, hey, I don't need that motion, but it's fun when it's a character drop, right? Like if it's a raindrop in the water cycle, or a red coat in the American, that just adds an extra layer of fun that for my 4th graders is all the buy-in they need to be totally psyched about it. So that's where I would kind of enter.
It's a great way of putting it, and I think it's, I would say I'm a little embarrassed that I went so much of my career before I heard about the SAMR model, because it's been around so long. But essentially, like, think shallow into the pool here, right? Like, just, does it get kids more engaged? And if the answer is yes, who cares what else happens? So you could, like in that example, there's a bunch of things we've talked through that, like, it's just drive a robot around a room, and when the robot gets to your feet, it's going to pause for 30 seconds, and you and your group have to deliver your sonnet, or or your little, the third president of the United States little speech. I don't, doesn't matter. And then that robot moves to another group. Who cares? The kids see a robot driving around the room that they coded, and it doesn't do anything else except make this little circuit and stop for a predetermined amount of time. Who cares? If it's, you're leveraging the fact that it was interesting to them, and now they're more engaged for everything else. So yeah, I think that's, like, if you're stressing about it, that's my favorite line that fixes everything, right? Just stop it. Just stop, and it's going to be okay. Like, go, just get yourself, I don't know. I feel like a lot of times teachers, and this is me, I'm gonna vent a little on my secondary educators here, is we have this inflated self-importance, and it could be upon you, upon your homework, upon your curriculum. Get, remember, like, I don't know if you guys have heard of this. This is called the curse of knowledge, which is we forget what it was like to not know. And so like, how could you not know that? I've known that for 30 years. Yeah, I'm 9. Like if you almost wish kids could say you moron sometimes, because we forget that, like, they don't have that background and they don't have the same experience. And so to rewind and remember, what was it like to be that age, and just to regain some of that empathy. And that's something, like I mentioned before, I wrote this book about burnout, that was where I actually started to see is these teachers that were just mean. I'm like, these are kids, man. Like, you really have to treat a kid like that to feel like you did your job? Like, ooh, something's wrong. And I think some of it is that, like, oh, my curriculum is so important. Is it though? In the full span of this kid's life, wouldn't it be better that they had joy on their face and in their day because of you? And I, like, man, some people may not like that talk, but that's my view on education. If those kids are happy and engaged with me, they'll work for me, even if they don't like what I have to teach. But I think I get the best of both. Like, if they're relaxed and engaged and having fun, then they're going to find whatever I have to teach more interesting, and they're going to want to do a better job because they enjoy being with me as the person leading them into that. So I don't know. I think, like, that, just take that approach, that just a little thing that makes it joyful and engaging. Who cares?
Can I just question, I've started in the realm of saying things that I don't care about in front of my kids. And I've been a little bit more transparent and a little bit different, the intermediate school, middle school age range compared to the elementary school. I recognize that I need to, I can't say that my first product sucks. I can't use that language because that's not school appropriate necessarily. But I can convey that same message, and I can prioritize that same thing. And I've even noticed that working in an environment, and Ken, you can probably relate to this, working with other elementary teachers that prioritize, in my opinion, things that don't matter. I have a coworker that will totally go down a rabbit hole of making something look beautiful. Even my wife's a fourth grade teacher. She is very talented at making things that don't need to look beautiful. She spends a tremendous amount of time. I love her. She really pours her heart and soul. But like we said, I can show up tomorrow not prepared and teach a dynamite day without a doubt. Oh, tell me what topic you want me to teach in math. Tell me what topic you want to teach in ELA. Bring the superintendent. I'm not worried. And I don't mean that to boisterously, but there's an element that I feel enough in my craft that I can make responses from my students into purposeful learning. All of that to being said, do you feel like there's a bridge between what we have all commiserated over, old school style of teaching that honestly college preparation has led us to, and new school, which I think we're all going to turn into, because to be frank and honest, speaking of leverage, we as educators are, if we're showing up every day and giving it our all, and our kids are not, being called to the office all the time, there is a portion where we do own a little bit of that leverage. We do get, our kids are engaged. It doesn't necessarily matter what assessment anchors we checked off. The point that I'm trying to get to is, how do you have that conversation, with kids about things that don't matter? Because the things that do matter, we prioritize. The things that don't matter are the things that drive us absolutely crazy and make us question our future in this career. How do we portray that to coworkers? And how do we also portray that to kids that doesn't come off as, oh, he's lazy, or up, he doesn't care, because that's not what it is. Up, I see that not being purposeful is a totally different point.
Yeah, I think in the midst of, I feel like that's the learning of COVID, right? Like when that in the midst of it, I remember sitting in a meeting. I'm like, I don't want to be rude to people I've worked with for 20 years. I don't care anything about what you're saying. I I want to go back into my room and I want to prep something that is amazing for the little time that we have. I don't care about paperwork. I don't care about grades. I don't, because and I came to a bunch of these little maxim statements, right? That grades are not feedback. They are as much a feedback as an autopsy is a medical examination, right? It does you no good by the time you get that information, and it does not feed the point with which we're here. So I would go back to this. I am, if you go to the highest point of Bloom's taxonomy, there's a parallel pyramid. It's by a guy by the name of Robert Dilts. It's called Logical Levels, and it's really more about psychology and about personal development, right? So I always say this as well, that like all personal development is professional development, but it's not always the other way around. But at the very top of that pyramid is essentially what Simon Sinek said is why. It is almost a spiritual kind of like why are we here? What is our purpose and what matters most? So to your point, Matt, is what matters is that we create lifelong learners who own every shred of this process of learning, which means they own their side of the relationship with me as somebody who can mentor and lead them forward. They own the content, they own the quality, the depth, the tangents, like the things that they can create at a high level. And I think if you start from that premise, you could walk back a huge amount of what we do in education as being completely irrelevant. And I made this comment to somebody one time. We had the 4 C's. It started off as 4 of 21st century learning, right? But I think most old school teachers are living in a story of 20th century education, and that's coercion, compliance. Now I'm going to draw a blank on the other two. Everything, conformity, and I don't even remember what. But it's like it's just they want kids to show up. They want them to be quiet. They want them to stay in rows, and they want them to all make the same exact thing. Like, so I don't know. I probably lost my patience with having those conversations with people, and I've just said, just stop 100% and reflect for 5 seconds about what actually matters in the life of a human being sitting in front of you that is going to live a life that is way beyond you. So then have the greatest impact you can on their life right now. And it does not have to do with 7th grade science. For me, it doesn't. It has to do with, can they function in life and choose a life that makes them happy, make a difference in their community, have kids that are, like make them proud, I mean, come on, like when we're really going to get at what this is about, this is about us helping another human being become a functioning, successful, fulfilled adult for an extremely long range of time with a very short time of impact.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And when you do that, and when you find that path, and what you are personally comfortable with in facilitating a learning environment like that, you don't have to be comfortable using robots. You don't have to be comfortable using 3D design programs. You have to be comfortable facilitating an environment where kids can explore. Even if you're an English teacher and you have one priority, which I would argue is an important life skill, you want them to write a heck of a lot in your classroom. Great. Just bring this mindset to that, and you can keep that core value of your classroom. I talked to a student today who the teacher was telling me is a student that really struggles. Somehow we got on the topic of baseball. He and I had a conversation for 15 minutes about baseball stadiums. He was able to name at least 12 by name. He talked about like the coolest thing they had, like Milwaukee having the slide, which I learned you actually can slide down that slide if you go there before the game. So keep that in the back of your head if you're ever at a Milwaukee Brewer game. But like he had so much information. I was like, that kid could write a freaking 10-page paper on this, because he was passionate about that. So if you can find those avenues for your students and allowing them to explore individually or explore as a class, you can still hold those core values that you feel are important to your content, but you can, like you said, elicit that feeling of joy and that feeling of wanting to do more. Matt, do you have something you want to jump in with before we hit the exit ticket?
Yeah, well, before, Ken, I gotta say, you might have to clip what Bryan said about his intro and add it to my hot takes argument. Signed, sealed, delivered. I win the argument. Summative assessments.
No, you don't, because I never said
on.
anything about grading. I said about using the summative assessment to drive future instruction, so you still lose.
Fair. I think the hard part, and what we've avoided talking about very purely tonight, is the most challenging word in education, which is the 5th C, which is control. And control is the biggest barrier between educators jumping to an environment like what we try, and I think all educators want to do, which is put the autonomy in kids' hands. That's what we all want to do, but the fear of being out of control and an admin walking in, or the fear of it going a route that they are not prepared to navigate. Bryan, you're comfortable to do a quick Google search and get as much information to steer as you need to, but you're a different person than me. I don't know if I can handle that, because I need 2 hours to scour the internet and become an expert.
And I've always hated that, what you just said. And I know you're saying it as someone else, but that's just you. And I mean, I would hear that. That's why I said, I feel like not an outcast, an outlier. How many times do people say to you guys, same thing, like, oh, well, that's just Ken, or that's just Matt. They're different. They're those weirdos, that can do that. And I could never, like, what? Like, no, you will never. You could. And imagine what it would be like if you came in and literally said all right, I've got 3 minutes, and then you guys are going to have to take over and teach. There's a comfort level with that chaos that will ensue and the ability to manage it if it doesn't take right off. But I mean, very few times, have I seen, once the kids knew that it was coming, that it didn't just take off because they want to own the learning.
Well, and I think that if we lose, I'll come back to that summative assessment. I think if we lose the priority of what the end goal is, if the end goal is that real learning occurred and not a product that we can show off, then we're probably in really good shape. And I think naturally giving the kids the choice to show their learning in all of this, whatever they do, but they have to do it at a high level, they're going to get beyond the essential question of the lesson, and they're going to check box way more of the questions or the major curricular items they had to hit at a deeper level that's probably ingrained so much deeper and will last with them, and so much sticks with them that, yes, it's scary. Yes, it takes some time. It is walking on a tightrope. But I would tell you, and this is, this episode will come out post testing season. Try this before the end of the year, whether you know your kids super well. And hey, let's set up today where we have an hour. Let's go with it. What do you want to do? You're a second grade classroom. Okay, maybe you provide a little more structure, but there is no harm in trying this and letting it prove to yourself the benefits, because unfortunately, you'll probably have gone 164 days of teaching, and that 165th will probably be the best lesson in the kids' eyes that you taught all year.
Yeah, I love that. So let's jump into our exit ticket. Bryan, these are the same 4 questions we ask every guest every week. Question number 1, what is the best thing a teacher can do to make a student's school experience better?
Oh, personally engage every single kid. I'm not saying every day, but personally engage. And so that for me was like, I mentioned I co-teach this class. The guy who I co-teach with is the newbie, so I give him all of the like traditional teacher jabs. And one day I did that. I like the kids would come in, he's standing in the hallway doing hall duty. The kids would come in and I'm walking around and I'm just literally looking kids in the eye, saying their name, giving them a smile and asking them some random, kind of silly question. And I made it about 4 kids in, and they're eating breakfast, and I have 2 to 3 kids following me. I've got my little entourage because they just wanted to be included, engaged. And what I would say a lot of other teachers see, particularly in middle school, is they become closed off and they want to escape because it's weird. I just mentioned this to one of my students. I gotta get a t-shirt, and it's just gonna say "make it weird," because I stand too close and they look at me and I'm like, I'm doing it on purpose. I'm trying to break that social barrier that says we can't have a normal conversation. And and before the bell rings, so that's it, man. Look them in the eye. It could be 3 kids a day, but set a goal. Make sure you know their name. Let them know that they're seen, that they're valuable, and man, everything changes.
The name piece is so important. We had a guest recently, I would say within the last 10 to 15 shows, that made a point about using their first name. Hearing that is like the most joyful word in the English language for you personally. And it stuck with me. And so I now work in our middle schools and high schools. So a lot of my former 5th graders I constantly see. And I've been really trying to make sure that when I pass them or see them in the hallway, whether it's a hi or a 10-second conversation, I say their name. And sometimes it takes a couple seconds to come to me. And a lot of times it's as I end the conversation with them. So we're talking for 20 seconds. And then as they're leaving, I'll say, "See you, Julia." And when I say their name, I can see them completely light up. One, it's hearing their name. It's also like, hey, the guy remembered me he remembers my name. But it's something that I've personally in the last 6 months really reflected on in using. And I see it's so important to just say their name when you have a conversation with them.
Man, it does that. Like, this broke my heart, going from a classroom where I'd have 120 kids all year to now I'm K-12. So every kid knows me. And so it's like, "Hey, Mr. Z, hey, buddy," it's like you don't, or I was in the classroom until November and then they found a replacement. Those kids, I thought I was leaving every week. Every week I thought, oh, they got somebody, and it just dragged on. And like that's crushing. I saw those kids like, it's like, I just didn't get to know them. And I feel like I failed that,
It's the Brian Regan sketch
Yeah.
where he talks about, "Hey there, Buckaroo."
I
right?
love Brian Regan is one of my favorites. I've seen him live twice. Amazing.
Oh, he's incredible.
Yeah.
Well, and I'll also, keeping it weird, not to take a side note, Ken, I found weird questions, obviously like appropriate,
Yeah.
but like, would you rather, be in this scenario or this scenario? Those type weird questions are the best way in class to break up cliques that I've seen. Seeing kids have disagreements about things that don't matter and find similarities with someone else has been one of the greater things we included in our morning meeting. And just take a moment and acknowledge, and whoever they match with, even though they would prefer to work with another partner, they have a similarity and they start that morning working with that group. It's been huge for acceptance within my classroom. Not that that's what anyone asked for, but just something I've realized recently.
Or you make like
So
some weird offhanded comment, and one kid in the class, like I've had kids look at me and go like, "You like, yeah, I got that reference
Got
from
it.
like,
Yep.
like what's you know, it was AC/DC, man. That's going back to the '80s, and like they get it. You know, it's like, yeah, you just had a moment.
You get the credit. Absolutely. So I'm excited about this question. So what is the best piece of advice that you may have received? And it could have been coming from a colleague, a supervisor, or, you mentioned one from a student, but I'll offer it up to a student as well.
I'm gonna take an audible and change your question into some of the worst advice that I've ever gotten, because I think it actually is more formative for me. And I had an administrator earlier in my career say to me, and if I wasn't an educator, I probably would be doing stand-up comedy, so that's always been my role. Middle school, they're my people, right? So she said, we just want kids to love. I don't really care if they love you. I want them to love science. And for about 2 years of my career, that, I don't want to say it tormented me because it's a little bit strong, but I really had a hard time trying to learn from that and take wisdom out of it, and then realizing now 100% wrong. I don't care if you love science. You are not going to love every class that you go through. I think that I can make it so that you love my class, even if you hate science, because I'm going to make it hilarious. I'm going to be self-deprecating. I'm going to pull all of the attention off of your middle school weirdness and put it on me so that you feel like cringy toward me, and yet you are happy. Like, that to me was the goal. And so it's weird. Like, for a while, that might be hard for somebody that's listening to this and you're getting feedback. Hopefully you are, from an administrator. Just because they've been in education a really long time doesn't mean that they fully understand your personality or the way that you choose to interact with students. And if you always have students like best interest in your mind, yes, you will become more mature. Yes, you will care less about them liking you in an insecure kind of way, which I think we all go through. But for me, it came back to, no, I want them to like my class, because middle schoolers are weird and life is all over the place. And I'm going to be that steady, always this kind of person. And if they love science, great, but not everybody does. And I'm okay with that, So I answered my own question for you.
Yeah. And hopefully, your blooming uniqueness is,
Absolutely.
a nice way to say,
love it.
Right. That's so cool to recognize. And I think we've heard from so many teachers along the way about having an impactful teacher led them to fall in love with a subject area because they saw the passion that someone they invested in cared about a subject. And they may not have loved science, but they left probably loving science.
Right. The reason I became a science teacher, or the reason I became a teacher was my ninth grade social studies teacher. He and I had one of those moments across the room, and he was a stand-up comedian, legit, on the weekends. He was my track coach, and like we hang out to this day. And it was like I'm not going to become a social studies teacher, but seeing that you could be a weirdo that always wanted to have fun and yet still teach was what hooked me, so.
And be dynamite, not just teach, but be dynamite in your role. So speaking of the moments that we don't feel dynamite, we recognize the school year goes in waves, that there are days, maybe weeks, that we struggle to survive. What's a piece of advice you can give to teachers, as if you know anything about burnout? I don't know. But what is something you can pass on to teachers to help them power up through those moments of struggle?
Yeah, I mean, I- if it's legit burnout, like, and this is systemic, and somebody would look at you and say, "Man, over the last couple of years, you don't seem to be bouncing back," then you need much more than just some quick advice that I'll give here. You actually need to go back down. I mentioned that pyramid. I didn't know about Robert Dilt's pyramid when I wrote the book, but a lot of it, I was like, afterwards, I'm like, yes, that's what I was seeing, you know. But really understanding, one I would see is boundaries. You've got to get over yourself in the sense that, stop assigning things that steal time from your children. Stop grading things to the point that your health suffers. You know, like when you begin to look at, you mentioned this before, Matt, what is most important? You know what's most important in your life? The fact that you are healthy, alive, happy, and purposeful for those that matter most to you, first and foremost. So for me, that was like, you know, I mention this all the time. I'm 48. I have a 4-year-old daughter. My wife and I went 17 years, didn't think we could have kids. She changed my entire world. And it would, and you know, you can look at that. Well, oh, you know, you could have cared more about yourself. Yeah, but sometimes it takes something like that where you realize, I I have to be better. I have to be healthier. I have to move more. I have to establish boundaries. I'm not answering emails after I leave work. I'm not responding to anything that you think is an emergency on a Saturday because you waited until now to tell me about something on Monday. I'm sorry. And I'm okay doing that because I my job is not more important than my health. My job is not more important than my family. And when it's all said and done, I want to ride off into the sunset, and I'll still be working in education, but I'm gonna do it on my terms, and I'm gonna do it with full health and purpose and impact. And so that would be number one. And I mean, like, man, you've got to get some healthy boundaries. And then the other one is really a almost like a really long range meditation of what matters to you. Like, forget school, just decide what matters. It will influence how you teach.
I love that. I love the authenticity of the layers of burnout versus just needing that quick pick me up. I think that's so necessary to share. So last question here. It's easy to, and I'm really excited about this one for you. It's easy to fall into facilitating a repetitive classroom. What do you think is is what's there that separates the teachers who are constantly the ones to seeking to change, innovate, and apply new teaching strategies to their classroom?
I'm going to share with you guys the book that I'm reading. It's called Curious by Ian Leslie. And it, again, like, I love when I stumble across something that validates everything I believe and then it blows it up right in my face. And so I was trying to find the quote earlier without taking my eyes off screen too much. And it's essentially this idea that there are different kinds of curiosity, right? Now, AI is blowing up even what, you know, we were afraid of Google a few years ago. And before that, it was probably that Encyclopedia Britannica had an index, you know, they'll cheat, uh, like ridiculous. But the one type of curiosity is that, oh, I wonder what the capital of whatever is. And once you know it, you just don't care anymore. And the other kind that is like the clown's handkerchief, that as soon as you pull, man, there's more and it doesn't stop. And then you have another question. And I feel like not only is education supposed to be that, and if this is going back to what I said before, why are we here? We are here to create these moments that broaden the curiosity of students who are living in a limited worldview and mindset. And that is the goal of age, right? But the problem is, some of us, you mentioned control, comfort. We get in a comfortable role. I taught this lesson last year. I know exactly what it means. I've already got I converted my PowerPoint into a Google slideshow, but it still has the PPT up there because I didn't actually change it. I'm going to teach the lesson exactly the same because it's easy. That sucked the life out of me. And when a lesson was good, most of the time I kept it, but every other time, as you were mentioning, Matt, I'd open that up and I went from a PowerPoint a day to one a week, and I would pull that open and I'd be like, all right, I got this, but I'm going to try to pull in some fresh resources in. And, you know, like, the other thing is, I think you start moving away from, yes, I've said this about 5 times now, your curriculum. And I started sharing with kids a quote. And this could go back to that look kids in the eye, learn their name stuff. And I would share with them like Howard Thurman, don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go do it. Because what the world needs is men who have come alive. Like I would put that up on Monday and I would say, look, what do you think it means? And I'd let the kids give feedback and then I'd tell them what it means to me. And then one girl said to me, she's like, my favorite part of this whole school year was, and I was like, I was waiting for that one lesson where we played the game with the little stuffed neuron on the floor. And I made the your mom's a neuron joke. And like, I knew what was my best lesson. She goes, the quote, she goes, those just really made me think. And at first I was like, dang it, they're not even mine, but but the truth was like, it was a point of connection about life and about character and about choices, right? I mean, so sometimes like just, wow, we're overcomplicated. And I think that's the point. Kids know those teachers that realize that they're dealing human to human. They're dealing with maybe making one moment that carries you, I don't care if it's a week or 10 years, they realize that connection more than their subject. So again, I could sum up all of it in that. If you're burned out, go there, go to that thing that we all have in common as human beings.
I hate to cut this conversation short, but to be respectful to you, unfortunately, we are going to wrap up with really what is the best way that our audience can keep that conversation going with you. You mentioned a book that you published as well as other works. What's the best way that they can connect with you going forward?
Yeah, so you guys can check me out at Bald Sci. So I kind of had started a Bald Guy Sci, sort of sounds like Bill Nye the Science Guy on YouTube. I have my own podcast called Kick Some Class, and kicksomeclass.com, which is my little edgy take on education. And so yeah, most like I'm semi-active on Twitter, but yeah, that's where you're going to find me at Bald Sci. And yeah, I look forward to connecting with people that are just kind of like-minded, that don't want to, I guess, defy the default is my latest phrase. It might be my next book. I don't know. I'm working on something on that. It's dug in there. So, but yeah, connect with me. I look forward to the conversation.
That's awesome, Bryan. Thank you so much. This conversation's been a joy and fantastic, and I really appreciate your time, and I think our listeners are going to appreciate the conversation as well and be as fired up as I am right now at 10:30 at night. So thank you again for joining us. I linked up all of the books that you referenced as well as some websites and resources in our show notes, which you can find on our website at powereduup.com, or just scroll down wherever you're watching and listening to this, and you can access those there as well. And we'll link up to your social medias and your website as well there. So Bryan, thank you again so much. And Matt, why don't you take us on out of here?
As we power down this episode, Bryan, to say without a doubt, you have left us feeling powered up. Stay well, keep on pushing. Hopefully when you're listening to this episode, you are nearing the end of the school year and getting close to that recharge time. But as we talked about all day, all episode, take a risk. There's no harm in it, and trust yourself. So we appreciate your time, Bryan, and we will talk to you all next week.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe on whichever platform you're listening to or watching us on YouTube. Each week we get to talk to amazing educators who are making a positive impact on the lives of students, their colleagues, administrators, and education as a whole. It's been such a privilege every week to be able to talk to these incredible individuals, learn from them, grow with them, and better myself and all of education through these conversations. If you haven't already, please consider sharing this with a colleague, someone who can benefit and be powered up from the experience of listening to these incredible conversations. Because of Powered Up, we are powering education by empowering you.